Welcome, my name is Michael Morris. I'm the superintendent of the Amherst Public Schools, and this is a little different version of Window into ARPS. Today, thanks to Amherst Media, we'll be able to share the slides used on the March 14th Amherst School Committee meeting to talk about my response to the Enrollment Working Group and a path for exploration for the future of our Amherst elementary schools. This work really started at the conclusion of the elementary building project when multiple enrollment challenges surfaced. As a result of the ending of that program, I worked with a school committee to set up what we called the Enrollment Working Group. It was a group that was focused on looking at the enrollment challenges across our three Amherst elementary schools, Fort River, Wildwood, and Crocker Farm. And the group started meeting last summer of 2017, and just concluded in March with all of their presentations being complete, March 2018. And the group had community members, staff members, administrators, and parents, guardians present to really dig into the data of what our challenges were and come up with possible solutions to explore. The Enrollment Working Group, decided to subdivide into five subgroups to really focus their studies. One was focused on socioeconomic balance between our schools. Specialized special education programs was the second one. A third group looked at the declining enrollments across our district. Another group looked at preschool access. And finally, we had a group that looked at dual language immersion programs and the feasibility of that in our district. We were fortunate to have the work facilitated by Dr. Kristen Rodriguez, who's a former superintendent and now consults to districts both in Massachusetts and nationally. And as you can see, the first subgroup was a socioeconomic balance subgroup. And they looked at what integration meant in our schools. And you can see the membership of that group. Again, I'll summarize just because of time. They came up with many recommendations. A couple I want to reference was a recommendation for the school committee to consider whether our enrollment policy was contributing to the integration of our schools, or whether socioeconomic balance was a virtue that would require a change to our enrollment zones. The number of students, as data, the number of students who qualify as economically disadvantaged is significantly different between our three schools, and we've seen an increase in that difference over the last couple of years, particularly as it relates to kindergarten and first grade students. And so that's an area that I took feedback on from that subgroup. A second subgroup of the Enrollment Working Group looked at special education, and particularly our three specialized special education programs. There's the Building Blocks program at Fort River, the AIMS program at Fort River, and the Intensive Learning Center at Wildwood. And they looked at these three programs in terms of access and integration as well. They asked wonderful questions about them. One thing they noted after surveying families of students in this program is that attending the School of Residence was a value that many of these families had. However, that being said, they felt very welcomed, very supported in the school environments, even if they had to travel to a different school than the school they were zoned to receive the special education services. The school environment really enveloped them with warmth and care, and that came up very clearly in the survey. And finally, that students in these programs, as integrated as they were in the school setting, still families reported struggling out of school much more than the in-school setting in terms of community acceptance, understanding that some students do attend schools outside the enrollment zone that their home or house is located in, and that would need further work both at the school and at the community level. A third group looked at declining enrollment across our district. Much like many other districts in Western Massachusetts, we have faced declining enrollment over the last 10 or 20 years. Some of the findings of that subgroup were that the enrollment trends across the district varied by school. In other words, the enrollment loss wasn't equal across our three schools, as can be seen in a graph coming up. They also felt that adding a dual language program in the elementary level could stem the flow of students to other educational settings and stop some of the decline in the enrollment that they saw. The next couple graphs show some information about that decline in enrollment and also changes in enrollment. So for instance, we've noticed a significant uptick in Latino students, also a substantial uptick in ELL and first language not English students. And I think that contributed to our understanding of what we need to, what our current reality is, as well as shifting our programming moving forward to meet the needs of the students who are currently in our schools. A fourth group was the dual language subgroup. They looked at dual language programs. They read a tremendous amount of research. They looked at previous proposals in the town of Amherst to include this in the elementary schools. And they also visited a school in Holyoke that is a dual language school. Some of their recommendations were to go deeper into the study of dual language programs and the feasibility of looking at that in the Amherst Public Schools. They also encouraged me to be in touch with MABE, which is the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Education. MABE came to our meeting last month after this recommendation was made and made a long presentation for the school committee about their experience working in communities like ours as well as others to integrate dual language programming into the elementary schools. We also had not part of the enrollment group, a group of UMass graduate students who did focus groups at the preschools. There was also an interest in dual language programming among parents of very young children in our community. Finally, there was a group that studied preschool access, and they looked at families who did go to preschool in this town, and also particularly looking at families who didn't go to preschool in the town of Amherst, came to kindergarten without preschool access. And the three causes they found for the students who came to kindergarten without preschool, which is incredibly valuable, was the cost of attendance, transportation, and the lack of available slots in area preschools, including ours that we have at Crocker Farm School. I think we all agree that there's a critical need that early education is essential for the development of young people. And so that was an incredibly helpful report as well. So my challenge ended up being, we had 5 subgroups, each with disparate focuses, disparate reports, disparate recommendations, and how to weave them into a path forward that the district could explore, because each of those subgroups provided incredibly valuable information, recommendations, and data to me and the school committee. So before I like to propose anything, I try to come up with what are some principles that are going to guide my analysis. So for me, one of them is I'm not interested in changing what the school location of students based on a dual language program, other things. One thing that I know and I've heard for the last few years is that kids love their school. They love the school they attend. They feel part of that community. And as any shift, I'd like to see it where students stay within the community they're already part of, current students, that is. The second is, if we do go down a road of a dual language program, I want to make sure that no one, again, is forced into it. Many parents expressed favorable opinions of that in a survey we did of all families, but there were others that were more cautious and more pessimistic that it would work well for their child. And so choice is really a hallmark of our approach and a true principle. We also have to be budget conscious. We are in the midst of cutting over $500,000 from our elementary school budget for next year. If we're adding cost to any of these programs, I think it's going to be a significant challenge, because I don't anticipate wildly better fiscal years ahead of us. So whatever changes we make, we have to keep costs as a major part of the equation. We also want to start slow and grow over time. We know that capacity is incredibly important in terms of doing change right. I'm less interested in making a change. I'm more interested in studying and analyzing and making sure that change is the right thing for our students and ensuring that the implementation promotes the best interest of all of our students and families. We've also heard that bilingualism is a virtue and a value that many in our community hold. Over 50% of the world's children are raised multilingually. The United States lags far behind in that statistic. And I've heard from many community members in Amherst and staff members that if we can integrate more bilingual approaches in the elementary level, it'll have academic but also social and interpersonal benefits for a wide variety of students. We also know that dual language programs have been shown in districts like ours to reduce the achievement gap, which is a core mission of our schools, particularly the achievement gap for ELL students as compared to their native English speaker colleagues. What I proposed to the school committee wasn't a formal proposal to do now. It was a path to explore, and we'll see where we land, and that's what this visual is trying to indicate. I want to go on a path. I don't necessarily have it all mapped out, and that's because we want to engage the community and make sure that we're being very transparent with the community and what we're thinking, what I'm thinking, and the steps that we're planning in the months ahead. One of the things that I did was try to do analysis of MSAN districts. MSAN is the Minority Student Achievement Network. It's districts that look like us, relatively suburban, high-achieving districts that have more diversity, racial, ethnically in particular, than the average suburban district. When I did that, roughly half of the MSAN districts have dual language programming at the elementary level. Most of them are what's called 50-50 programs, so students experience half of their day in English, half of their day in Spanish, or any other partner language. We would be thinking about Spanish here. And so I've spoken to all of these districts, gotten a chance to talk about the pros, the cons, the challenges of implementation, the benefits, and it's been incredibly helpful to look at comparison districts that way. I've also looked at districts in our state, in the Commonwealth, that have dual language programming. Most of those districts demographically look quite different than us. That's what I really like about the MSAN districts. That being said, many of them have been able to share valuable insights into Massachusetts as it relates to laws, policies, and as I mentioned, some folks have already been to Holyoke to visit their program. For me, when choosing what partner language to English we might go down the road of exploring, I thought about what is the percent of native speakers in our community, if that's really one of our target audiences. And by far, Spanish is the most common first language that isn't English among our student body. Of our ELL students, roughly half of the students have Spanish as their first language, so that seemed like a logical thing to take into consideration. We also have had this increase in Latino students, so it's not just the linguistic, but also the cultural aspect as well. In our region, Spanish is a very common language that's spoken and beyond our school walls as well. We also have to staff such a program if we were to implement, and we have a fair number of bilingual staff, English and Spanish. There's not really a comparable other language that has a critical mass of staff members who are fluent in it other than English and Spanish. And so for us, Spanish is the preferred partner language to English that we would explore as part of this study that is upcoming. We also wanted to have objective criteria to assess what location of the 3 schools would be the ideal one to start a program in. So one of the criteria was we need sufficient space to have 3 classes per grade level, 2 classes for a dual language program, 1 class for an English only or monolingual class to provide that choice. We also wanted to make sure that no students lost access because of their disability. Fortunately, dual language programs, from everyone I've spoken to, there's a pretty small band of students who it's inappropriate for in one of our specialized programs, but we wanted to take that into consideration. I think also critically, we received feedback from the Enrollment Working Group, look at the school that had the most population decline over the last 10, 15, 20 years. As I said earlier, there's not an equal distribution of the decline, and so we took that into account as well. We also took into account, could this be used to balance the socioeconomic diversity of our 3 schools based on the feedback from the Enrollment Working Group. And in case there was a lottery used or we were pulling from across the town, a relatively central location seemed to be a factor that we should consider. It's important to note that this proposal to be at Fort River School is not attempting to gloss over the infrastructure issues that currently exist. We have a school building committee and some capital funds headed to Fort River or focused on Fort River. So I just want to be very clear that it's looking at a curriculum side, not at an infrastructure side. So some might be wondering, why are we talking about starting a dual language program at 1 school and really only in kindergarten? In our timeline, we feel confident that if we choose to go in this direction, the fall of 2019 would be a viable, realistic timeline. It's been the recommendation from MABE, from all the professional experts, to start in 1 school, 1 grade level at a time, based on capacity, based on being able to implement well. We have evidence from multiple districts that didn't take that recommendation, that they came to regret their decision. And it's also a significant piece around our recruitment and retention of staff and bilingual staff. Attempting to organize that in more than 1 school and more than 1 grade level simply isn't feasible at the current time. So I've dug deeper into some of the MSAN districts that actually are most similar to us based on size. Some of the MSAN districts like Madison have over 30 elementary schools. So from an enrollment policy perspective, they're not necessarily the best comparison. But looking at Princeton, Verona, Wisconsin, LaGrange, Illinois, and Harrisonburg, Virginia, has been really helpful for me to understand MSAN districts with dual language programs and how do they set enrollment policies. So for instance, Princeton and LaGrange have neighborhood school only. That's who fills the seats of their dual language program. Whereas Verona and Harrisonburg have some level of a hybrid, that the primary demographic is the neighborhood school, students in the neighborhood school zoning, but they do fill seats with a lottery system with different priorities based on the community. But it was very helpful to look through and understand the districts. Of particular note is Harrisonburg, which started having dual language programming 8 years ago and now has, as you can see, multiple dual language programs within their district. And I've talked to them a lot about how they've done that, why they've done that. They've had a huge uptick in Spanish-speaking students and families in Harrisonburg. Have attempted a multi-pronged process that included increased access to early childhood education in an attempt to respond to the changing demographics of their community. So in terms of the composition of classes, we'd looked that there'd be 2 dual language classes at kindergarten if this proposal was to be supported. And we'd have to work out the neighborhood-only zoning versus the hybrid zoning, and that'll be a lot of community conversation in the following months. We'd also retain a 1 monolingual class if this was to occur at Fort River for families who opt for that. And I want to acknowledge again the value of that family choice as a critical component into this exploration. As you could have seen in the prior slide, that's really typical. Every school similar to us that maintains a dual language program also maintains at least 1, if not more, monolingual English classes. So one might be wondering about what are the impact to Crocker Farm and Wildwood School, and our approach to that would be as exciting as the exploration for the dual language component at Fort River. We want to have an equally dynamic and exciting process for those 2 schools to redefine themselves and build perhaps a more specific identity and to engage their critical stakeholders of families and staff members to really dive in so each school can further extend its the identity it already has and differentiate itself a bit more from the others in the district. Of course, students will still be learning math, reading, writing, science, technology, social studies, civics in all of our schools, regardless of what happens. And we want to allow for more flexibility for schools to set their own path and how they approach those tasks. Our core value is that all students' needs are taken care of. And what we know about education, there's many different ways to get there. When we think about the declining enrollment report from the Enrollment Working Group, one of the pieces of feedback they received in their analysis of multiple surveys is unique programming really matters. Families have a vested interest in that, and we want to get to the place where all 3 of our schools have a level of uniqueness that's very attractive to families in the education marketplace. In terms of socioeconomic balance, I think one avenue one could use is to use a lottery system as a factor to balance socioeconomics within our schools. Other districts have found that the socioeconomics of their student body change when they open a dual language school. It's very attractive for many families, and this is going to require further evaluation and analysis. In terms of special education, right now we do have an imbalance, as you can see, between Fort River, Wildwood, and Crocker Farm, the percent of students with special needs. Part of that's that Fort River now has two programs, but 3 classrooms of students with special needs who come from all across the district based on the services provided at Fort River. One of the opportunities we have is to, because of a natural attrition of students who will be graduating our school in the fall of 2019, to be able to take a look at that and evaluate whether building blocks can occur and have classrooms at more than one of our elementary schools, both to balance the load, but also to provide more resources to Crocker Farm and or Wildwood. So we hope to explore whether the Building Blocks program can be located in more than one of our elementary schools to share resources across our district and to balance out the needs of our students across our 3 elementary schools. Again, no student would have to change schools if this change was to occur. Current Building Block students would be able to stay at Fort River if they so chose. We'll be engaging the larger community, particularly the special education community, on this question in the coming weeks. In terms of preschool access, one of our challenges right now is that Crocker Farm is at capacity in terms of number of classrooms. So even if we had the funding to open another classroom, we don't have the space, and the preschool staff would rightfully tell me they don't have enough space truly for the students that they currently have. So if we were to do a lottery system and perhaps have fewer classes at Crocker Farm, because Fort River would expand, it might allow for that space space to be vacated at Crocker Farm over time, where another preschool class could be a viable possibility in that school. One of our limitations is funding right now, but one of our limitations is truly space on the preschool front, and we'd like to work on that as part of this plan. As I mentioned earlier, our budgets have been very tight in recent years, and dual language programming is the most cost-conscious way to be able to integrate world language into the elementary school setting. The program relatively cost neutral. There's some minor curriculum costs for new materials in Spanish, but those get filtered out and separated out over 7 years. So no one year is overwhelming. And really a lot of the other changes outside of preschool are not significant in a budgetary way. And that matters when we're facing the constraints that we are. Another question I've received is, what about current students in world language? If we're talking about our best case scenario being implemented in kindergarten in the fall of 2019, that misses pretty much, it literally misses all our students except for some preschoolers who are currently in our district. You know, our fiscal constraints are exactly what they are, constraints right now, a major barrier. And if there are after-school possibilities or families or other community members who want to engage on this topic, I'm happy to engage and try to figure out what might be feasible to do in a budget-neutral or cost-neutral way. It's a real challenge to do that in 2018, given our fiscal realities. And I'm certainly open to possibilities about how to do that well and maintain our current staffing levels that we are working so hard to keep in place for our students. This slide really captures the process. The Enrollment Working Group presented on 4 dates, the 19th of December, January 24th, February 5th, and March 13th. MABE presented on February 27th. I made this a more comprehensive presentation to staff on the 14th of March, as well as to the school committee, and we're so appreciative of Amherst Media doing this condensed version. In the next couple of weeks, I'll be visiting the Cambridge, Massachusetts public schools, have a dual language program called the Amigo School. Next week, I'll be visiting another school in New Jersey, in Princeton, New Jersey, with very similar demographics, called the Community Park Elementary School. They just started their dual language program a couple years ago, whereas the Amigo School has been in operation as a dual language school since the 1980s. We have some staff members coming with me on both of those trips. We also have two staff members going to a MABE conference specifically on dual language programming and ELL students, because as I said earlier, we are very conscious of the achievement gap and see this as an opportunity to explore addressing that gap. We're having informational meetings with families on April 4th at the Jones Library in the Woodbury Room. We have translation available, and one of them is at 9:30 in the morning, and the other's at 4 in the afternoon. And they're identical sessions, but we know that families with young children, the target audience is really preschool families. Families with young children time is at a premium, so we wanted to offer multiple times, try to work with families' schedules. We're also having a meeting that's just got scheduled for April 25th at 11 o'clock. That is actually informational meeting, but all in Spanish. So it is specifically geared to Spanish-speaking families, and that'll be in the central office at the middle school in the Family Center. We're working on getting meetings with our CPAC, our Special Ed Parent Advisory Council, on both the building blocks implications as well as dual language programming for students with special needs. We'll be doing some more work with MABE this spring to get more expertise, actually working with another district who's in a similar exploration place that we are. I'll be updating the Amherst School Committee at each of our meetings in the coming months. We hope in the spring or summer to do something called the La Siembra, which is a 2-day retreat. Includes staff, administration, parents, guardians, who are interested in dual language programming to really help fill in some gaps that I haven't addressed today about program design, program model. And so we're looking to do that in either the months of May, June, or July, but we'll share that once that gets scheduled. When we come back in the fall, I'll be traveling to Harrisonburg, Virginia, which I mentioned earlier. They have many dual language schools, and I really want to see a school at the beginning of the school year. The other schools I'm visiting 3/4 of the way through the school year, but seeing it in 3 or 4 weeks in, seeing how kindergartens are understanding being in a dual language environment is something that I feel really passionate that needs to get done before I would make a formal recommendation. So I can't only see the March reality, I want to see the September reality as well. Once we get to a proposal place, probably in late September, early October, I'll be both presenting it to school committee and doing forums around the community to gather feedback and input. And then asking for a school committee vote in October. Based on MABE's experience, that timeline fits with fall 2019 implementation. We're also exploring other aspects like a Spanish language classes for staff that's come up, university courses to help, or connections with universities to train bilingual teachers or dual language teachers. Continuing to work with MABE. In particular, they have a dual language special education network, so we learn from other districts' expertise. And also recruitment of bilingual staff. As I mentioned earlier, we do have, we're fortunate to have the level of bilingual staff members we do. And we know if this program is to start, we'll need to, over time, further develop and recruit bilingual staff members. So that's a quick summary of something I'm very excited about, and I've gotten some positive, excited feedback from the larger community about. To summarize, really looking at exploring whether dual language programming could come to Fort River School in kindergarten in 2019, and the other implications as it relates to preschool, special education, declining enrollment, and other areas. And also, how do we invigorate and continue the great work that's happening at Crocker Farm and Wildwood by making them more unique too and giving more flexibility to our elementary schools to really become the 21st century learning environments that I think our community is interested in. I know I am, as both a superintendent and community member. And I think the most critical piece is that we have many opportunities for feedback and interest, involvement for community members in the next couple months. If you have thoughts on this, anything else you'd like to share, my email is morrism, M-O-R-R-I-S-M, @arps.org. Please shoot me an email, give us a call at 362-1810. We really want as many people in the community to become involved and interested and offer feedback and offer challenges and critiques to make our program, if we go down that road, the best it can be and to be incredibly supported by the community. Thanks once again to Amherst Media for filming this and giving me the opportunity to do a nutshell. May not feel like that to viewers, but to me it does, a nutshell version of a much longer presentation that was made to the school committee on March 14th, which that video can also be found on Amherst Media. And please be in touch and stay involved in this as we move forward. Thank you.